Yes, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. Welcome again to another edition of Indaba, the program where knowledge grows, the program of the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago. This is the 25th of February, the day before a very historic day in the calendar of struggle in the Caribbean and especially Trinidad and Tobago. And we are going to be talking about that event in this program. And that, of course, concerns the launch of the Black Power movement, the active phase of the Black Power movement in Trinidad and Tobago. We have a very packed program for you. As usual, we will begin with the Africa report. And as indicated in the last edition of Indaba, we are going to have a sequel of the same topic, the geopolitics, crossroads of geopolitics in West Africa. And that would be followed by the first interview, a discussion on 1970 Black Power Revolution, the relevance of the struggle against neocolonialism. And our special guest is Dr. Rhoda Arrindel, who is no stranger to Indaba. And the second discussion, which is a very critical topic, a very crucial moment that we are at the present time in the Caribbean. In a sense, it's a crossroads experience that we are in here, insofar as a test, a litmus test sort of sovereignty in the Caribbean. But of course, we know it transcends the Caribbean. And that topic is Let Cuba Live, US imperialism, a chokehold on the Caribbean. And our special guest is none other than David Abdulah, who needs no introduction. David also has his Tuesday Talk program, and this, of course, is a feature of his program. And we have Leydis Bernal, who would be joining David, and we hope that Dr. Arrindel would remain with us if she has the time, because it's such a crucial moment for us, especially after the Venezuela tragedy recently, well, ongoing tragedy, really. Welcome, my brother Shabaka, who is, of course, an expert in his own right on these matters of Cuba and Venezuela. Welcome, one of the progressive thinkers in the Caribbean, and deserves mention as well. So, welcome, my brother.
Greetings, Doctor. It is indeed a pleasure to be with you today on this Wednesday. And like many of our listeners across the Caribbean and indeed across the world, I look forward to being part of the discussion that we have today, the things that we have lined up today, the things that are critical for people of the Caribbean to consider.
Yes, indeed. The Africa report is a little longer than usual, and that is after editing out some critical issues. But that topic continues. Even as I was finalizing, there were some new developments regarding, in a sense, actual charter of recolonization of a country in West Africa. Could imagine that coming from the United States Congress. So it's a developing topic, and we may come back to it. We will have to come back to it, not necessarily in the next edition, but we will come back to it. So without further ado, I would call on our technical expert and expertise of Renee, our sister Renee Francois, who is always there managing things. And of course, we need to welcome our producer as well, whom you hardly ever see, Sister Zakia Uzoma Wadada. Thanks for always being with us and for taking the program where it is today. Renee? Crossroads.
Witnessing the birth of a new colonialism Or will Africa finally find the strategic sovereignty to say no?
That was law professor Patrice Lumumba of Kenya, and this is the Africa Report, a sequel to the previous edition on Crossroads of Geopolitics in West Africa. The African continent, especially west and south of Ethiopia, is facing an existential sovereignty crisis. Everywhere, European colonizers had ceremoniously conceded flag independence while devising alternative means to manage and control the post-colonial extraction of resources, foreign trade, and the foreign policy of their former colonies. The Confederation of Sahelian States, or AES, represents an enigma that defies the logic of this decolonizing management. This is a context in which we must confront the jingoistic, crusading speech of America's principal diplomat and foreign policy mouthpiece, Marco Rubio, during the Global Security Conference in Munich, Germany last week. The speech lambasted decolonization as a dangerous delusion that robbed the white-ruled empires of Western Europe of the privilege of looting colonial wealth, a situation that the U.S. is committed to restoring.
For 5 centuries, before the end of the Second World War, the West had been expanding. Its missionaries, its pilgrims, its soldiers, its explorers pouring out from its shores to cross oceans, settle new continents, build vast empires extending out across the globe, creating a Western supply chain for critical minerals. But in 1945, for the first time since the age of Columbus, it was contracting. The great Western empires had entered into terminal decline, accelerated by godless communist revolutions and by anti-colonial uprisings that would transform the world. But the euphoria of this triumph led us to a dangerous delusion. A dangerous delusion.
Let's hear the learned jurist PLO Lumumba's response to Rubio's extremism.
They talk about supply chains.
Fallacies, and ironies of his presentation. Rubio's speech is one of the most dangerous threats to the current world order, supposedly grounded on international law and United Nations charters. It is a frontal threat to Africa's development in the context of the AU's Agenda 2063. The fact that the speech received a standing ovation speaks to the cohesion of the global white supremacist power structure and the hopelessness of the non-white leaders in the audience, whose fragile sovereignty was the object of Rubio's furor, but who robotically applauded anyway. Even as Rubio spoke, the U.S. was offloading high-impact military equipment and special forces in northern Nigeria's rare earths mineral belt, a stone's throw from the border of the Republic of Niger. The Americans were to join other established troops already operating from air bases at Benue, Kainji, and Maiduguri air bases. The official objective is shrouded in diplomatic jargon, such as the U.S. military is there to be, quote, a force multiplier, unquote, to do, quote, a strategic reassessment of the security landscape of West Africa, unquote. Local analysts are aware of Nigeria's potential entrapment. For example, Dr. Hakim Baba Ahmed anticipates that over time, Nigeria will increasingly be losing its sovereignty to American dictates. General Dagvin Anderson, commander of AFRICOM, explained that America's priorities include the containment of groups that threaten regional stability and, by extension, America's interest in the Sahel and Lake Chad basin. To me, the objective of the plan is to use Nigeria to conquer the region by destroying the revolution of the AES. Indeed, General Anderson acknowledged that the U.S. presence is designed to, quote, flush out insurgent cells from sparsely governed rural swaths, unquote. He did not suggest where the flushing would deposit the insurgents. Many local analysts, however, contend that this flushing is intended to force the jihadists to relocate to Niger and Burkina Faso. That's the evil plan, whereby increased jihadist forces in the AES would be de facto proxies of American foreign policy and Marco Rubio's recolonization agenda. The recently concluded 39th session of the AU Heads of State Conference in Ethiopia did not give me a hint that the political leadership of Africa's premier supranational organization is prepared to confront the specter of recolonization head on. The AU's Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security is Bankole Adeoye, a Nigerian. As expressed by Adeoye, and reiterated by the AU's chairperson Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, the AU continues to uphold the fallacy that the ritual of the ballot box is the only legitimate means of getting into power, regardless of how corrupt and hopeless the electoral process.
Zero tolerance for unconstitutional changes of government. 6 member states still remain suspended, regrettably.
The AU suspension of the AES deprived these progressive states of a voice in the politics of the Union. Let us recenter the discussion on the interplay of geopolitical forces and strategies in West Africa. There is no doubt that China's economic empire is America's greatest phobia. We should remind ourselves that the current weaponization of terrorism narrative by the West had its first victory in Libya in 2011. The target was not only Muammar Gaddafi, the president, but also the Chinese, who had major stakes in Libya's oil and infrastructure sectors, backed by a Chinese population of over 35,000. NATO launched its destabilization campaign in early 2011, partly to eliminate the Chinese, who were attacked everywhere by armed thugs. By the end of February, the Chinese government had evacuated all of its 35,800 citizens from Libya, just in time to avoid the US-NATO bombings the following month. The destruction of Libya had a domino effect on national security across northern Africa, particularly in the Sahel and Savannah lands, extending as far as northern Cameroon. Military-grade weapons flowed easily across borders of the Sahel and Savannah into the hands of fundamentalist Muslims, reigniting expansionist agendas via jihad, reminiscent of the 19th century. Contrary to the Hollywood racist geography of tropical Africa as jungle, northern Nigeria is part of the Sahel and Savannah. In fact, all the states with Atlantic coastline have majority grassland, savanna, and/or Sahelian landscapes extending to their northern borders. These regions are blessed with vast resources including rare earths, gold, coltan, and uranium necessary for driving AI, space, and military technologies. It should be noted that America's doctrine of recolonization is not dependent on military aggression alone, but equally, if not more so, on narrative warfare, one of the most successful and stable weapons of Western imperialism. This seems to be the preferred method to undermine West Africa's relations with Russia and China. To give 2 recent examples, less than 2 weeks ago, Burkina Faso's foreign minister, Karamoko Traore, signed an agreement with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, on mutual strategic interests. Lavrov denounced the information war waged by the West against countries that pursue an independent and sovereign foreign policy. Nevertheless, a social media campaign was instantly launched against Russia over a sex predator described as Russian to create a storm of resentment against Russia. On the heels of this affair, America accused China of financing Fulani jihadists and persuaded Nigeria's cybercrime units to investigate and ban China's most popular e-commerce app, Temu. The information war also directly targets the states of the AES,
For example, a recent deadly jihadist attack on Ghanaian tomato traders deep inside Burkina Faso is obviously designed to disrupt more than the region's food supply chain. Such attacks disrupt critical trade routes from the AES to the maritime ports on the Atlantic. The attack fueled demands on Ghana for reducing its food dependency on the AES. Interestingly, an unexpected outcome was Ghana's dispatch of emissaries to Ouagadougou and the urgent signing of 7 bilateral agreements on security, border management, among others. These agreements are a major blow to the enemies of the AES revolution. External pressures on the AES have also led to some concessions, the most notable being Niger's preparedness to hand over 95,000 tons of uranium concentrate, or yellow cake, to the French company Orano. This is the equivalent of 63% of the uranium stockpile prior to Niger's nationalization in July 2023. President Tiani emphasized that the remaining 37% belongs to Niger. Tiani was prompted to act swiftly because its intelligence had revealed that the attack on the Diori Hamani airport 3 weeks ago was orchestrated by France to seize the uranium stockpiled there. A few days ago, Niger trucked 1,000 tons of uranium from the northern mines to place on the open market. This is worth some $240 million, or 135 billion CFA francs. Compared to the pre-nationalization era, Niger would have earned a mere 550 million CFA from the same production under French control. The ripoff by France is startling. Beyond finance, the liberation of uranium, the world's most feared natural resource, causes much unease within Marco Rubio's white supremacist civilization circle. Niger's determination to maximize returns from its natural resources extends to the Chinese, whom Niger is calling upon to renegotiate their petroleum contracts, which are currently extremely unfavorable to Niger. This topic is extensive. Please share your comments, and we will see you in the next one.
Yes, so there you have it. That's your Africa report for this week. Very wide-ranging, a lot of strings to pull together to make sense out of what is happening in West Africa in particular. But of course, what happened in West Africa will and has affected the entire continent as well. I want to apologize if you saw an error in the title. That was because for the first time I could not review before sending it off to Renee because the computer was threatening to freeze on me, and I said, look, let me send this thing before, I'm unable to send it at all. So yes, my brother, no, yeah, your brief comment before
we have to go straight to the elephant in the room here, Doc. How are you surprised by the boldness with which the United States of America is attempting to relaunch a period of imperialism in the world?
Well, it's not a matter of surprise. I think it's of course, it's not just an African thing. Trump has been threatening everybody.
Yeah, there's a consistency.
But usually bullies strike at the weakest points first, so that that's the reason for striking against Venezuela, that they knew would not perhaps respond with missiles, and of course going after Cuba when Cuba is at its most vulnerable, and they go after some of the African states for certain reasons. I have not heard any social media person that I follow in West Africa on the geopolitical situation mentioned that actually the president of Nigeria had a meeting, a backdoor meeting with the commander of Afrika in October in Italy. And that was before Trump made his guns a blazing threat. It was about 2 weeks before. So my thinking is, the usual grandstanding of Trump was actually based on the fact that there might have been some concessions already made to the commander of Afrika, because the bombing came in December. And it looked as if, Nigeria was surprised, but the general said, and that was his report, that he had a discussion and agreement with the president of Nigeria, which is shocking. But I have said on this program already, the president is a compromised president. The CIA has said that he's an asset. It's not for me to deny that or to challenge that. I know of his record in America. And to answer you generally, those presidents of Africa that have similar compromised paths would be easy targets. The Americans would know them. They would know them. Their intelligence agencies are very efficient. The Israelis also gather information, share information. America, the Israelis have their tentacles all over Africa, and they have had a renewed interest since the Gaza genocide. There's a new focus. So they know, and they know who to target first. And targeting the largest black nation in Africa and in the world definitely is going to impact in a very significant way the psyche of black people worldwide. There's no question about that. I don't think it's an accident.
And I think the other thing that came up in the Africa report was connected to that was Marco Rubio's view that his inability to understand why Europe took a different course after 1945. But I see Dr. Rhoda Arrindel is here, and I want to welcome her, and I'm sure she's going to be able to shed light on what, because of the subject that she's addressing tonight, on the direction that the world took after 1945, and perhaps why we seem to be heading in the wrong direction today. Welcome, Dr. Arrindel.
Good evening, brothers, and to the rest of the team over there as well. First of all, let me just give a shout out to you and the entire team, especially your tech folks, man. Because while you were on, I was able to see the tech as well. And I was like, I wish I had your person on my team. This would be a lot more helpful. So shout out to your team. And thanks again for this invitation. I don't know how to express how I feel, because words escape me these days, because the body is going through a whole lot of different emotions. Most days I'm upset with what I'm seeing and hearing. And then other days I'm like, so what are we going to do about it, right? So first of all, thanks for this conversation this evening. We are planning something similar here at Howard University, and I'm looking forward to it. So I don't know if you want me to give any comments now or you have a question for me, but yeah.
Well, I thought it would be a great way to lead into your subject area, because you are looking at the 1970s, and the 1970s are definitely a post-World War II phenomenon. That's where they're situated in history. They're taking advantage of the climate that was created in World War II. And so Marcos Rubio's comment about about the change in direction in the world in 1945, I thought was a great way to introduce your area.
Well, let me just tell you, I'm a 60s baby, so I'm very young. 19. So I don't know much about wars right before then. Okay, no. On a serious note, with everything that's happening, because I like to put things in context. So I was, looking at the details of your revolution in Trinidad? Because 2 weeks ago on my program in St. Martin, we talked about the Grenada Revolution because we wanted to tie it into the independence of Grenada and how we move forward, etc. And in going back to some of these things, you know, going as far back as the Haitian Revolution, one thing I can tell you that has not changed, and Marco Rubio, to me, he just expressed what was always there. Maybe they were being politically correct these last couple of decades and not saying the quiet part out loud. But one thing that has remained clear from the first colonialists that came to our region and to Africa and the rest of the world, they do not see us as humans in the same way they think they are humans, right? They do not respect our humanity as people of African ancestry or other non-white people. So when they talk about whatever they need to do to survive, you talk about this existential threat, not just to Africa. There's this notion, they created this dangerous thing called whiteness. And whatever whiteness was supposed to be, it was supposed to give them and their ilk a sense of superiority, but they tied it into this notion of their religion, which would make you, once you bow down to whatever gods they were serving, you would also serve them. And what we are seeing is that people are not accepting that narrative anymore, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in the Caribbean, and whether it's other parts of the world. And then the other thing, whiteness, purity of whatever the white race is no longer attainable because the mixing didn't allow for it to be white anymore. So if you had one drop of blood or whatever chemical concoction they came up with, whiteness is no longer becoming a majority in the spaces that they occupy and they believe they need to control. So whatever needs to be done, whether it's annihilate a people, whether it is steal their resources and hoard it as they continue to, because the narrative on its own can no longer stand. And I think that is the kind of revolution that we, at least I am hoping on our end. Like, I do agree with Stokely and the brothers before that nonviolent protest is no longer sufficient. Whatever form of revolution that we're looking forward to in this modern time, in this day and age, you got to start thinking more like a Traore, but you also got to be talking about how do we arm our youngsters in particular with a different mindset. So watching your video and tying it into the discussions that we're having and seeing how the older African leaders are behaving is not where young people are. It's certainly not where the youth in Africa are. And I am working with a group on the continent, the African Youth Forum International. They are, they're prepared to do what needs to happen to get rid of that kind of thinking and that kind of leadership. And so I'm tying that also into what's happening in the Caribbean this week, in CARICOM, next door in St. Kitts. Your prime minister in Trinidad, I think she's mad. But that's how most of us in the Caribbean feel right now, because we're like, what is wrong with Caribbean people? So I want to bring it back to that conversation about mindset, because this fight, and I don't know, you could speak better to the Trinidad situation, this whole idea of Indo versus Afro-Trinidadian or Afro-Caribbean, it's a crazy mindset. But I think we as Caribbean people, as African people, as world people, can move beyond that conversation if we bring it back to the bare component, humanity. What does humanity look like? How do we create a place and a space where all of humanity is equal, but not just equal in terms of, we don't discriminate regards to race, etc., in terms of the distribution of resources, and to make sure that the ownership of those resources are based on who you are, where you are, but also your humanity. Why do I say that? I heard you guys talking about neo-colonialism and recolonialism. And I live in St. Martin. We are still colonized. There's nothing new about our colonialism. It's ongoing. It has not left. And I'm watching what has been happening to us for the last couple of centuries, because it hasn't changed yet by us. We don't have political independence, and this wave of independence that swept through the Caribbean, in particular the British territories, that stopped, and everybody went about their business, and it's a matter of survival, etc. But look at us now, where we are today. Everybody is back in our boat. We saw what happened in Venezuela. We saw what is happening in Trinidad. Jesus Christ, what is happening in Trinidad and Tobago. But it's also the rest of the Caribbean. It's also the rest of the world. So I think the conversation for us, and for me and what I'm doing, has to come back to the new revolution and what does it look like. And my best example that I give my students here of what that can look like is one based on people power. And then I'm thinking of the whole Bad Bunny situation at the Super Bowl, etc. Not so much the conversations around Bad Bunny, but I studied in Puerto Rico. I did my doctorate in Puerto Rico. And there's one thing that always amazed me about Puerto Ricans that I think a lot of the wider Caribbean is still not capitalized on, is how Puerto Ricans do not negate Africa, even in its whitest form, as we would call Puerto Ricans. I mean, there are some people in between, but in the definition of what Puerto Ricans are, they have claimed Africa and everything else, or Boricua, Borican, whatever, however you term it, and then they move out. And I think that's the mindset we need in the Caribbean. We are Caribbean people first, but we are Caribbean people in all our manifestation, but we do have to recognize there's a hierarchy, right? A la whatever society we created with big whites and small whites, and then Indians, and then Asians, and then Black is always at the bottom. So our humanity does not equal anything else. So we got to come back to that conversation. That's where I am. I'll look forward to hearing your question, but I'm thinking honestly and working diligently with the youngsters that I work with, like, we need a revolution, but we got to start with the youth. We got to change the mindset. We got to arm them with power and with guns if necessary, and with bombs, because this is the only way that this thing is going to change. Any discussion about, protest and let's have voting and election, fine, but that's not going to be enough.
Yeah, you've raised a number of questions there for me, Dr. Arrindel, but I'm going to let Dr. Fergus take over for a minute, and then I'm gonna.
Yeah, let me take a go at it. I was thinking about one of our most faithful fans listening now. I'm sure he's smiling and he knows who he is when you say that perhaps nonviolence might be irrelevant to the struggle at this stage, and you need to arm yourself and such. I want to go to the fundamental here, that the Black Power movement was a struggle against neocolonialism. And as you rightly said, colonialism perhaps might be the better term, because independence did not bring any significant change. A flag is not changed, an anthem is not really changed, and nothing significant that had changed. So I am also of that view that neocolonialism is a term that needs to be decolonized as well. And so in that context then, even the term, even if I still use the term in the interest of the listeners, that it was a struggle against neocolonialism as a reference point, 1962, period of flag independence, as I like to call it. Now, it was relevant and decisive at that time. There's no question about that. My impact was limited, but because perhaps of the state takeover of the revolution, or overthrow of the revolution, or whatever you want to say. But the issues were relevant, and there were some decisive impacts. Now, the issues make it relevant now, definitely, because, as I said, the fundamentals had not changed, and they still remain basically the same. So my question is, what is the difference about the now? What is the difference? What has changed? Are the chances of success or impact greater or lesser now? And we are talking about Black power. The struggle, we may not call it Black power, but Black people still in the same struggle, as you said, going back to Haiti. And of course, we know before Haiti, we can go right back to the beginning of our forced entry into the Caribbean. We have been struggling ever since. You know, the first years of the forceful settling of Africans in the Caribbean, you had the first slave revolts in 1522. And ever since, you know, I like to call them, you know, insurgencies and emancipation wars, because they were really wars. That's how even the contemporaries saw them. And we are still struggling. So, but what is the difference now in the context of the 1970s? What is the difference now? What has changed? And are the chances of success greater or lesser now in the context of what we are experiencing in the Caribbean now?
Okay, I want to go back to your comment about the first slave revolt. One of the things I try to remind us is that so these are like documented revolts, right? But we are all aware that the ancestors from day one are resisting, right? This idea that you taking me, capturing me, kidnapping me, chaining me, enslaving me, trafficking me, not normal, not natural, and I ain't having it, right? So from day one, everybody is revolting from day one. And this is something we got to keep reminding our people. We didn't come on this scene willingly. So when we get into this conversation about nonviolence and how we must go along with democracy, is that we have to remind our people, and especially our younger people, that from day one, from the time they came with the first idea of, listen, I'm going to hold you in bondage, I ain't having it. So people are resisting. That's a normal human behavior. That's a regular way to behave. And I don't know if I call it violence. I call it resisting, and I call it protecting yourself, defense, whatever it is you want to call it. But we ain't having it. We're not having you in control of me. That's a normal thing. So I think that's always been there. It's always been part of us, a part of our DNA. The fact that over time, our people were able to be subdued. And again, I come back to this important role of institutions like religion and school and these other institutions where they program the younger mind to accept certain things as normal or acceptable, or why we can't do nothing about it. So, what we going to do? We have to fight against that mindset. So what's going to be different? We have to stop preaching this idea that nonviolence is going to serve. I don't even like the word nonviolence. That resistance is normal, resistance is natural, and it is resistance that is going to make a difference. Look at what's happening here in Minneapolis and Minnesota, and look at how people are coming to the streets. And they have a different ways. They put up sign and they do this, but they're very organized. And how you resist. There are different ways to resist, but you gotta resist. You must resist. You cannot say, okay, we need a revolution and let's have, elections and nonviolence. You gotta resist. So that's part of it. The other thing that I think is going to be cardinal, and again, when you talk to young people, they don't have the information to be able sometimes to defend their behavior or to be able to articulate what it is they're doing. But young people are very astute. They're quite aware that what is happening is not right. It is not fair. They're more into the conversation of fairness. And they have social media right now. They have these things in their hands where they can influence each other. And they are shaping the world. They are shaping the entertainment industry. They are shaping different industries by the way they behave. Now, the question is, who controls all of this? And it really saddens me, and I saw that in your clip, that the discussion about Africa, the Caribbean, and I'm only talking about Africa and the Caribbean right now, right? That we are still having a conversation about which of the lesser evils do we align with, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, United States, Europe, etc. Very little conversation about how we band together as a family, as an African people, and create the technology. and spread the message of whatever spirituality we want to share, rather than keep consuming other people's religion and their Western ideology of how the world should be organized, etc. We have knowledge, but we always see ourselves as consumers of knowledge and consumers of produce. We have to keep changing the mindset that we are the producers, we are the knowledge holders just as well, and push that. So to me, that's the kind of revolution that we need.
But Dr. Arrindel, I do have a question now. In terms of your own research into 1970 Black Power Revolution, which of course found its apogee in Grenada, what lessons are you finding from that particular revolution? Because you've touched on a number of themes. The question of whiteness and blackness, the question of resistance, violent or non-violent, the question of democracy, the question of religion, and I suppose specifically, Eurocentric supremacy in religion or Christian supremacy. These are the subjects that you've touched on. How have your views been shaped by your research into the Black Power Revolution?
Okay, I want to go back to the basic definition of of the word revolution, right? Which literally means to turn back, right? To turn away, right? Revolt, right? That what you're doing when you're thinking about revolution, and when you're looking at, in the case of the 72 revolution, that we're looking at how Black people or people in the Caribbean, in the case Trinidad, Grenada, you mentioned, that feel that we are at the bottom of the barrel, and we want to change that. But we're also aware that we are no less than. So when you hear people like whether it's in the Caribbean, whether it's in Gaza, whatever it is, question, how could these people serve the same God that I serve when God is doing God on their end is doing this to me? We cannot be having the same God. It is impossible. It is impossible that you have the same God that I'm serving, and I'm in this condition, and you are oppressing me. So my question, when you come back, like, what is that serve me? I pick from each space, right? When I talk to students about this, the Grenada Revolution, what was considered some of the flaws or non-flaws? Talk to people who live there. You speak to the ones in Trinidad. I honestly believe this, and you will be a better candidate than I will ever be. Maybe Mr. David Abdulah will answer better than me. Because I find myself, to be honest with you, I'm going to confess this here on air. As former president of Caribbean Studies Association, I used to hear in my ear from Trinidadians, oh, Indo-Trinidadians don't like Afro-Trinidadians. Afro-Trinidadians don't like India. We can't get, they don't get. And I used to hear that in my ear. And I started to say at some point when I saw how your prime minister, this one, behaving, I started to say, well, maybe this thing is true. And maybe Caribbean people need to start looking at more at who is Afro-centered or Afro-descended to see if we're going to solve our problem, because it seems like non-Africans in the Caribbean do not align with what we see as our oppression and how to get rid of it. So I started to question that. But then you talk to other people, and Abdulah will be able to say, because I heard you, David, on the other program recently, right, when we had the last one, and I said, I know I can't give up because ain't everybody thinking like that, right? And ain't everybody seeing it that way, that it is bigger than this little thing that we have about. And I'm not saying Afrocentricity is not important to the cause. It absolutely is. But we need to bring it back. If we are going to win this thing, we have to bring back to this idea of humanity. And what is humanity? What is humanity? And why is it that I don't deserve the same humanity that you think you deserve? And people are when you talk like that, people are a little more understanding on that level. So yes, but what I say to my students when I go into the high schools, etc., especially in these very posh schools, I hear you, but look at every society around the world. And if you were to create a hierarchy, regardless whether it's Black ruled or not, where is Black or Black people? And it's always at the bottom of the society. It's always, why is that? And let's have the conversation about why we don't think that's a mistake. And that's the thing we want to change. That's the thing we want to revolve, right? Revolution. We want people to see the humanity in all of us, but especially in Black people. How do we reverse that? To me, the things that you are doing, your program, I say kudos to that. But a conversation is like, we need a mindset change. But we also got to be honest. Let's talk about fairness of distribution of resources. And let's talk about if Africa had a couple of nukes, would we be treated the same way? Let's be honest. We'll be different. We'll be a different conversation.
Yes. So these are there are a number of issues. There are really serious issues that you've touched on there, Rhoda. And as a child of the Black Power Revolution myself, I would, of course, want to engage some of those issues, because sometimes, the value system that I was taught, people assume all kinds of things about that value system that was articulated in that period, and a lot of those assumptions are actually not they don't fall on solid ground. They're made but I'm not sure that this would be the appropriate moment yet, because I know we have Brother Abdulah here. I see it's already 8:49, and our brothers and sisters in the north of the Caribbean, in Cuba, in a real, terrible situation that is being worsened on a daily basis by the hegemonic power in the hemisphere. And so we want to get to that subject, and perhaps after we talk a little bit about Cuba, we could continue this discussion further with that concrete issue and the issues that come up around Cuba, because Cuba, of course, is not alone, and of course all these issues are related. Marco Rubio's position that it is time to return to old school imperialism is not just impacting, it's impacting the world. We're talking about Canada, Greenland, Venezuela, Cuba, Dr. Fergus, the Sahel region in the Africa report tonight, Haiti. So there's a lot to talk about. Brother Abdulah, welcome to Indaba, and let's get the show on the road here.
Your mic, you're muted. You're muted.
Yes. Okay. Sorry about that. Yes. Thank you very much, Brother Shabaka, Dr. Fergus, old friend, Sister Rhoda. Very good evening to one and all. Yes, Rhoda's raised some key issues which we can't really address fundamentally, but last evening on Tuesday Talk, we had a very enlightening program with Dr. Fergus as well as Dr. Zofia Edwards on the whole question of 1970 and the counter-revolution. So not just here, but globally. So we were trying to interrogate some of those issues. And of course, I'll share the cloud recording by the morning. But we do have to discuss Cuba. And as Rhoda raised the issue of humanity, the open letter that I sent on behalf of the Assembly of Caribbean People to the heads earlier today, and I would have shared it by email and otherwise, it was really focusing on that issue of humanity and really a call to the moral conscience of Caribbean leaders on this question of Cuba. And whether that will resonate or not, I have no idea, but that was the framing. And I didn't put it in, but I remember a very brief conversation I had with Fidel. It was on the stage during a break in a big conference. And I spoke to him. He asked me, what do I think is the significance or the main essence of the conference? So I said solidarity, because it really was a conference, international conference in solidarity with Cuba. He said, no, he said it's about humanity. And that struck me. It's always remained with me that he was always focused on humanity. So yes, Rhoda, I think the point you're making is very valid indeed. But Shabaka, we also have Sister Leydis Bernal here, who of course is one of the senior members of the diplomatic corps or the diplomatic staff of the Cuban embassy here in Trinidad and Tobago. So I don't know if you want me to start. So let me start with asking her the pertinent question here.
We're talking now at the point after more than 6 decades of an illegal and illegitimate blockade by the United States of America. After 5 years in which Cuba was falsely listed as a country that is involved or is a state sponsor of terrorism, with this latest uptick in the embargo in 2026 on oil and fuels. And of course, Brother Abdulah has stated in his letter which he just mentioned, to CARICOM leaders, that the United States is, because of all these things, creating a humanitarian crisis in Cuba. Can you give us an idea? Can you speak to the extent of that crisis for the benefit of our listeners, so they could really understand what's happening on the ground because of the unilateral actions of the United States of America?
Okay, good night, everyone. To stay here in this interview, thank you very much for this invitation to express our position, our message in this space. In our country right now, after the President Trump executive order on January 2029, the situation right now is worse. Before, from more than 60 decades, our country suffered the economical blockade and unjust economical blockade. But right now, this situation is worse. It's worse because the different oils or foil that we receive from different countries, because we have to import the foil.
Yes.
Right now is we don't receive this resource, and the situation is worse in all areas. The education, the daily, our people suffer the basic needs, and the support of the potable water, also because all our system, the water system is depend of the foil. The electricity now is worse, but our people is resilience. The Cuban government installed many solar parks, but it's not enough. It's not enough because it's not sustain all country. But it's a step, the first step to obtain our sovereignty, the energy sovereignty.
Yeah. Sister Leydis, you have spoken like a true Cuban patriot there, speaking from the point of view of resilience, the strength of the Cuban people, the legendary courage of the Cuban people. But I need our listeners to understand what happens when a powerful country like the United States of America, shuts down, stops other countries from trading with Cuba in the way that they have done, to try to cut Cuba off from the rest of the world. Dr. Brother Abdulah, says that the U.S. has its knee on Cuba's neck and is literally trying to choke the life out of the Cuban people. I want to bring Brother Abdulah back in for 1 second to speak, to quickly summarize some of the challenges that Cubans are facing. Sister Leydis is already speaking to some of them, but of course, being Cuban herself, part of her instinct is to talk about the resilience of the people, which is legendary. their courage, the kinds of measures they have taken in the face of 6 decades of this type of violence. But we're talking to people on the ground in different parts of Cuba, in Trinidad, in Havana, in Pinar del Rios. What are they telling you, Brother Abdulah?
Yes, well, for example, schools and universities, with the exception of primary schools, basically are being closed. And students will have to try to learn online. But then we're given the electricity challenges because the power stations can't operate at full capacity because there's no fuel to run the power stations. And then it means severe power cuts and therefore internet outages and that kind of thing, electricity outages. So even learning is challenging. Hospitals, a lot of the care that will be given is basically emergency care. I saw a report on Teleshow, I think today, that Cuba just set up a new company of transport, public transport, because buses are basically not functioning except like one bus on a particular route once a day one way and once a day the other way. There's just not enough fuel. But they've set up a particular bus system just for healthcare professionals to be able to get from their homes to the hospitals and back. Other than that, the healthcare professionals will be not able to get to the hospitals to provide care for patients there. Yes, doctors might be visiting patients in their homes because Cuba has a tremendous primary healthcare system where doctors visit people in their homes. But that can't be substituted for persons who might need more advanced medical care and so on. Farmers would have difficulty in getting their crops out of the land into the markets if there's no transportation to get it, from the farm to the market. So that impacts on food security. Sanitation is affected if your garbage trucks can't function every day because there's no fuel. These are just the realities of what the United States is doing to Cuba by strangling its energy and fuel supplies. It's collective punishment, and it's a form of genocide because people will die because of what is taking place.
Yes, I think that's the point. Yeah. I think that's the point we need to get to. That you're talking about not just suffering but death for a lot of people, particularly the most vulnerable in the society. Now, for the benefit of our listeners, because I want people who are listening to this program tonight to really understand this particular situation. Because when I talk to people outside on the streets, they seem to have a little difficulty understanding what is taking place here, particularly when prime ministers like ours make the kinds of statements that our prime minister made very recently, and we're going to come to that. But first, let's answer the question for the benefit of our listeners. What makes this particular blockade of Cuba illegal? Not just morally wrong, but what also makes it illegal?
Well, any action, any sanction that is applied by one country against another can only be legal if it is on the basis of a United Nations Security Council resolution. In other words, in furtherance of the United Nations Security Council resolution. There has been absolutely no UN Security Council resolution with respect to sanctions against Cuba, embargo, blockade, as the case may be. And in fact, contrary to that, at the United Nations General Assembly annually, Cuba brings a resolution calling on the United States to end the commercial, financial, and economic blockade of Cuba. And of the 190 odd countries that are member states of the United Nations, well over 180 vote every year in support of Cuba's resolution, saying that the United States should end the blockade. The two countries that every year vote against that resolution and support the blockade, the United States and Israel. With the exception of 1 year, after President Obama visited Cuba, that year the United States actually abstained at the UN on that vote. But other than that, the US always, of course, votes against it. So the UN and world opinion says that the blockade must be ended. But the US doesn't care about world opinion. They don't care about international law. They will do whatever they want. As they kidnapped President Maduro. That was illegal and they're trying to try him in a court in the United States. And international law says you cannot try a sitting head of government or head of state in your country. You could only try that person could only be tried by the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, not in a third country's or second country's jurisdiction. So, but the United States doesn't care about any of these things. The Secretary General of the UN said that this is a humanitarian crisis. The UN Special Rapporteur of the UN Human Rights Commission went into Cuba last year, met with various people in Cuba, saw the conditions, and this was before the energy blockade. And the report is out there, it's transparent. And she said it's a humanitarian crisis and said the blockade must be ended. And the US must remove Cuba from this so-called list of countries involved in state sponsorship of terrorism because there's no evidence to support that and so on. So she made all of those points, but the US just doesn't care, and particularly this Trump administration. And Rhoda was making the point, and you yourself about Trump Rubio. They have an ideological position, and they spelled it out, in their national security strategy, which was published late last year, and it said very clearly that the objective is to restore American preeminence in the Western Hemisphere. We will deny non-hemispheric competitors the ability to position forces or offer threatening capabilities, or to own or control strategically vital assets in our hemisphere. Our hemisphere, as far as Trump and Rubio are concerned, they own this hemisphere, and we must repudiate that.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you, you just mentioned the votes at the United Nations, the annual votes, and we know that Trinidad and Tobago, as you said, is one of those countries that has historically voted against this unilateral blockade by the United States of America. Were you surprised then by the recent statements by our Prime Minister?
No, because from about 2019, when she came out as leader of the opposition in support of Juan Guaido as the president of Venezuela, and called on the United States to sanction the government of Trinidad and Tobago when Vice President Delcy Rodriguez visited Trinidad and Tobago on a plane which she claimed was a plane that was sanctioned by the US, and therefore Trinidad and Tobago should be sanctioned. So she clearly from then had begun to take a position that was pro-Washington. And then when Trump was elected, she congratulated Trump. And when he was inaugurated, she was very effusive in her praise of Trump. She said, this is what America needs. This is what Americans want. She said Biden and Harris were too woke, that DEI or was that equality and so on, those things must have gone too far in the United States, and so on and so on. So she bought into the MAGA white supremacist, Rhoda was speaking about the white supremacist ideology and politics and project or Agenda 2025 that Stephen Miller crafted and so on. That is part of the Trump agenda. And that is so she did that even before she became prime minister. So I'm not surprised. And it's interesting in the national security strategic document, they say, quote, we will reward and encourage the region's governments, political parties, and movements broadly aligned with our principles and strategy. And the question that we in Trinidad and Tobago have to ask Shabaka and Dr. Claudius is, what is the reward that is going to be given to Mrs. Prasad Bissessar and her government perhaps, for broadly aligning with the US's principles, quote unquote, and strategy?
Yeah, let me ask, ladies, I have to ask, when and of course, if this question goes beyond the boundaries of what you can answer, you can simply say no comment, or we could pass it back to Brother Abdulah. But the crux of my prime minister, and I say that, of course, with a degree of shame, her argument is that we're talking about a country that is a communist dictatorship. How do you feel when you hear Cuba described in that way? What is that? How would you respond to someone who launches that kind of attack on Cuba?
Cuba is a socialist country. Fidel Castro in 1961 he declared our character of the revolution as a country socialist was during when the event during the attacks of the victims of the attack of Hiron. Fidel in that space, in public space, in 23 y 12 Street, the corner, declared the socialist revolution in that time. For that reason, Cuba is not a communist. Any country, because the communism is after the socialism. That is philosophy. Is no, I don't know. It's another country is communist, but Cuba is socialist. A dictatorship. Cuba know the dictatorship during the Batista government. That was a dictatorship. I remember my grandparents. They told me many stories about that time. For different reasons, the people in that time suffer because the social difference was highlighted in that time. When Fidel in 1969 triumphed the revolution, all change that Fidel made was a progressive idea that in that time America and Latin American countries recognized that revolution, that a progressive revolution in all regions. For that reason, that her words for our people is no. But Cuba is socialist, it's not communist, because communist is a the philosophy is no. But dictatorship, I don't know. I don't know for her what is the concept of the dictatorship, because she mentioned it a free election, and another mention, but Cuba has election because all people vote for one candidate in the community, and that candidate then in the National Assembly was voted again, and then continue to the state council. I don't know what is the
Yeah, so the system, election, your particular electoral system. I'm seeing Dr. Arrindel has her hand up.
Yeah. I wanted to laugh in a very serious way and not because the question was a joke, but it's the narrative that we keep hearing. And what I want to warn against, right? And I do this with my students every day, because again, we need to, I believe, those of us in the revolution need to stray away from even using their concepts and their notions. This idea of communism, dictatorship, because then what you do to the masses, you kind of make it palatable for them to go along with the evil that you're doing. You saw that with Venezuela. Maduro is a dictator. He did this, he did that. And even Americans here in Washington, they don't agree. But then they bring the only justification they can go with is that, oh, he's a bad dictator and he was bad to his people, etc. Because what these evil people do, they give this language to the masses. They feed the masses with this language so that when they do their evil based on their supremacist notions, that it becomes palatable. You saw the same thing with, radical left, DEI, woke, communism, and they tried it with Mamdani in New York, and look at how young people responded, because Mamdani came back with a message of humanity. It comes back to our humanity and how all of us are in this thing. And I think that's what any new revolution is going to require. Do not use their labels, because there's nothing more dictator-like than what Donald Trump is doing in the USA right now. Do not fall for their language and their labels. We have to stop using their language. We have to also encourage and empower the younger generation to use a different language based on different concepts, so that when we see it, we can call it out as anti-humanity.
Yeah, and of course, at the end of the day, the suffering of the Cuban people is blamed on their system rather than the blockade.
Right.
But
yeah, I want to jump in. I want to jump in here. I want to address.
Before you come in,
I want to address two dimensions.
Oh, she's back.
Doctor,
I'm hearing an echo.
I just want to end. I just want to give Brother Abdulah an opportunity to state what he's calling on the Caribbean heads of government to do at this time, and then we open the floor for a larger discussion, because Brother Abdulah has some specific recommendations which he has made in his letter to the heads.
Yeah.
So can you list those first?
Yeah, sure. And of course, we need to, at some point, not maybe this evening, have a proper discussion about Cuba's democracy, because Cuba does have a democratic process, yes, which is far more participatory than here in Trinidad and Tobago. But that's, and elections don't get bought in Cuba by multimillionaires giving people a jersey with some $100 bills in it like we have here, which corrupts the whole process. So we are, in the Assembly of Caribbean People's letter to the heads, we are saying that they must stand up to Marco Rubio. Of course, that meeting took place earlier today, so we don't know if they did or didn't. And to boldly tell the Secretary of State, one, to immediately end the illegal blockade of oil and fuels to Cuba. And this must include ensuring that no military action is taken against any oil tanker or ship that is transporting oil and fuels to Cuba. And there must be no threat or use of sanctions on tariffs or other punitive measures against any other country. My thing is jumping here. Secondly, that to end immediately by executive order, remove Cuba from the so-called list of countries that are engaged in the state sponsorship of terrorism, remove all the punitive measures against Cuba that have been imposed by executive order, and to start the process within the US Congress to repeal the various laws that give effect to the blockade against Cuba, and to enter into respectful dialogue with the government of Cuba to address areas of mutual concern between Cuba and the United States with no preconditions. So those are some of the important things we said. We also call on them to deal with Rubio with respect to the extrajudicial killings of Caribbean citizens in Caribbean territorial waters, and to hold the US accountable for those killings and so on. And we also call on them to do certain things with respect to Haiti as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Fergus.
Yeah, I want to address two dimensions of the situation. But first, I want to agree with you. I like to refer to what you just talked about as narrative warfare. It's a very critical aspect of American imperialism. First, they go after you, they paint the character. And all of the American media, there's no exception. They engage in exactly the same thing. They use the same language, the same terminology. And when they have gotten what they want, they go silent or the narrative changes. Right? So I just wanted to throw that in. So we also have to develop, not just as you mentioned earlier, that physical, violent aspect, but the narrative war as well. It's very, very important to confront that narrative war with narrative war as well. Yes, so I want to, David, to address these concerns. Now, the UN, you did mention the UN in your address to the heads. We know the UN has made resolutions and declarations, but they consistently fail to take any effective action, not even to try. The EU has done a similar thing to condemn the blockade, but they too have taken no action. So I want to know, is it in the case of the EU, the fear of America, or is it something more sinister? Like, for example, really a kind of secret sympathy for the Americans and what they're doing to the Cuban people, rather than sympathy for the Cuban people. What is it really that influences and shape their inactivity inaction to follow up what a serious declaration of condemnation? And the second thing I want you to address is this. Now, there has been attempts to send some oil relief to Cuba, as we know. The Russians have tried a thing. They're using Cameroonian flag, Gambian flag. Why? The question I want to ask is, why wouldn't Russia use its own oil tankers, its own flag, and possibly escort those transports with their destroyers into the Caribbean? They don't have to violate the territorial waters of America. What is it that is playing off here with Russia? If Russia sends its own ships to the Caribbean, would the Americans dare to board the ships? Especially if they're being escorted.
Yeah, that second one.
I want you to address those two.
Yeah, thanks.
Anyone
that
first.
second one. Yeah, on that second one, I did see something. I don't know if it is true or whether it is, fake news. You can never tell what is fact and what is not. Some statement issued by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation saying that there is an oil tanker en route to Cuba and that it is being escorted by a Russian warship. Now, as I said, I haven't been able to fact check that. I haven't had a chance to fact check that. That would be a new development if that is in fact the case, because it would be therefore throwing down the gauntlet to the United States and daring them to attack a Russian tanker being escorted by a Russian naval vessel. So that's going to be an interesting development. The issue of Russian tankers, of course, is that the US has sanctioned all of them. Now, a lot of those sanctions placed on Russia are in fact, some are not, some of them are pursuant to UN resolutions, some of them are not. And so that is Russia may also be saying, well, because that if they fly the Russian flag, they will also be seized by the US because the US has sanctioned them. So it really is a major issue. I also think, quite apart from Russia, that Angola and Brazil and Mexico should challenge the US on this question and, dare them to impose the tariffs and so on. The US may not seize those tankers, but they might impose tariffs. But I do think those countries have a moral and other obligations. So in terms of Angola would not have been independent had it not been for the Cuban sending their sons and daughters to fight the South African regime and defeat South Africans at the Battle of Quito Carnival. So Angola is an oil producer, and they should make an attempt to send oil to Cuba, as should Brazil. Lula and Fidel had a very close relationship. Together they started the Sao Paulo Forum long before Lula became president of Brazil and so on. So those countries have to step up. They're not small countries. They're significant countries, and if they act together, then I think they could break that blockade. Now, with respect to the first question, sorry, I lost track of the first question.
Was it fair?
Yeah, I'm talking about fear or something more sinister. Why the EU seem to me to be complicit in the blockade. That is my position. They seem to be complicit regardless of, the declarations that they make condemning the blockade.
So what they will do is they will do soft things. Apart from condemnation, some of the countries, not all, but some of them, for example, are sending, planes with food and medicines and so on into Cuba. So they will do those things which are softer, but they will not, for example, stand up to the United States and tell the United States where to get off on this question of the blockade of Cuba, in the way that they've been trying to push the US on the issue of Ukraine, They're not trying to push the US on the issue of Cuba. And I think that is part of a Eurocentric view and your colonial and imperial philosophy and thinking and culture that is deeply ingrained in the European ruling class.
That's the brotherhood that Rubio was talking about, huh? That's the brotherhood. That's the white brotherhood that he was talking about. So there's something in it.
Yeah, for sure. And they will solve their conscience by some of the countries sending humanitarian aid. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So let me now that we've come to the, we're coming down to the end of the program, I think I want to address one or two quick things here. Since part of the program was that question of the relevance of the 1970 Black Power Revolution to where we are now. And let me just say a couple things. First, on the question of violence. As we said earlier today, the Grenada Revolution was the highest expression of the Black Power movement. It was a bloodless coup. And I think that, that speaks to the degree to which there was a commitment to non-violence within the Black Power movement. And so when we look back on that period and we try to take lessons from it, I think we can take away the lesson that non-violence is really is the primary objective, the centerpiece of the thing. Not violence is an option if all means to non-violence have been exhausted. And of course,
now let me jump in a little bit. Let me jump into this story a little bit here.
I like that, Dr. Fergus.
No, and I want David to talk to it too, because David is very much, knowledgeable about the revolution. And I believe he might have had personal, relations with Bishop. When Bishop took power, even if it was a bloodless coup, wasn't Bishop prepared for blood? If it came to shots, because you can't talk revolution and not consider violence through revolution. Revolution implies there could be violence, even if your path might be non-violent. So wasn't Bishop prepared that if the forces of the state confronted him, that he would have taken the state through violence? David, could you just briefly confirm that Bishop would have been prepared to be violent?
Well, the comrades of the NGM had arms, yes, but quite frankly, what they had was not enough to have confronted the police and so on in Grenada and the army at the time. They had guns that had no firing pins, they had very little ammunition, and so on. They would have been outgunned. But they were relying, therefore, on the political moment where they knew that when they went into the police stations and Morris made the announcement that the revolution has happened, the police took off their clothes and changed their outer uniforms and fled, right? And they were able to take the True Blue barracks where they had a small army. I think just one person was killed down at True Blue. So yes, they were prepared. Let me put it the other way. They were prepared to die. I want to put it that way.
Right. That's important.
To die.
Yeah.
They were prepared to die if that had happened. But their assessment was that they could achieve the overthrow of the Gary government without having to fire a shot. And as it worked, that actually happened because of the moment. The analysis was correct in terms of the total support of the population against Gary, and the fact that the armed element of the state, which was relatively small then compared to like what it is now, but the armed element of the state was divided, demoralized, and not.
I just wanted to add, right? And again, I'm borrowing from Nelson Mandela and other revolutionaries. Like in history, I've not known one revolutionary who we now laud that was never prepared to die. If you're not prepared to die, you're not really committed to a revolution. That's like
No,
the
even Topeka Michael, when he was Topeka Michael said he had his weapon with him,
gotta be
and he
prepared
was
to die.
non-violent, he was leading a non-violent student organization. He said he had his weapon with him and he was prepared to die.
Yeah, but let me
Right.
come back
The
to
Cuban
And
Revolution
I
is
don't
an
think
example
let me
of
come
that.
back to Fidel. Let me come back to Fidel and Cuba.
The Cuban
Because
Revolution is a big example for that.
Yeah, but let me talk about Cuba, because I was at a conference in Cuba in the 90s, I suppose, and Fidel, it was a big conference, and Fidel, there were people from the Chiapas. They had just had the whole revolt in the Chiapas in Mexico, and there were people from the Chiapas there, and there were also people from Colombia, from FARC and so on, who were present in the conference, right? And Fidel said, he was gave a very important address about the political and historical moment in which we were in. And he was saying, you know, with all due respect to my comrades who are still engaged in armed action and so on, he said that is no longer going to be possible. It's not going to be possible to have an armed revolution in the way that Cuba did in 1959. He said Cuba was unique. He said times have changed. He said, you know, you know that I know about armed revolutions, you know, because obviously that was what Fidel came to power that way, right? But he said that's no longer possible, that circumstances have changed. And therefore, what we have to think about now is the mass movements, popular movements, social movements, and eventually using those to catapult you through elections into government. And you could have seen the left right throughout the region, the hemisphere, whether it is Evo Morales in Bolivia, Lula in Brazil, and so on, doing that. And what I want to say, though, that the issue that Rhoda raised is, I like to talk about a revolution of the mind, because I think that's where we have to start, a revolution of the mind. And yes, we need to tell our history of resistance, because we have a proud history of resistance and struggle in the Caribbean, and we must tell that story over and over again, so our people get that spirit of resistance back within them again, and the confidence that they could resist and struggle. And the form of struggle has to be what John LaRose coined for us: disciplined mass action. In other words, the masses of people conscious of the reality and conscious of what they want for the future, taking action to bring about fundamental change. And that's my last comment on this.
yes, and so I will just add that I don't think anything that's been said in this last segment here contradicts my position. In my discussions with the late Winston Leonard, Kwesi, Uncle Kwesi, and many of the other revolutionaries that have now passed on, including my father, who's still alive with us and still with us, their overriding commitment, they were all prepared to die, but their overriding commitment was one of peace and nonviolence. And I think that is important for us to understand that clearly. I think another aspect of their thing was their commitment to democracy. The statement, the primary call in the Black Power Revolution was power to the people. And power to the people is a statement about democracy. It's not a statement that says exactly how you have to find that democracy, how you structure that democracy. It's not a statement that excludes Cuba's system of democracy, but it is a statement about the role that people must play, the mass of the people, in deciding the future of the country. There's another one issue I think we could take up. We're having a serious Indaba over time now. I know they'll be complaining from our heads, but but we need to touch on one more issue before we leave tonight, and that's the question of blackness and whiteness, right? I take the view on that subject coming out of the 1970 Black Power Revolution that Paget Henry takes, and I know Dr. Fergus, you're familiar with that scholar. He wrote the book Caliban's Reason. And in that book, he explains that the imperialism imposed the idea of blackness and whiteness on the world. It was created in the imperialist project, and of course, those terms, those issues, those areas, those definitions are fluid. And if we look at the history of the Americas, we can see that. If you go to the early part of the 20th century, in the United States of America, the Irish and the Italians were not considered white. Whiteness was something that you acceded to, right? And of course, having European heritage, was an advantage in terms of that conversation. But when you look at some of the blacks in the Caribbean today, some of the blacks, and here I'm using it in the way that the Black Power revolutionaries use the term. We're talking about non-white peoples who, when I say that, non-European peoples, because what, when you look at the way that non-European peoples operate in the Americas, some of them who are darker than some of us here tonight on this program accede to a level of whiteness, and they operate in their minds and their policies and their actions as white as anyone else. And I think it was Fidel who said at some point in his life that he was one of the blackest people in the region. I don't know if that was a quote that was there. So we have to be very careful about how we understand.
Can I offer you another book? I want to offer.
I just want to leave one statement here. Our job is to deconstruct the hierarchies that have been imposed by colonialism of white over brown over black. And when we talk about Indians and Africans, part of that creation of whiteness and blackness was the eventual evolution of brownness to occupy a middle position. And so so Africans were defined as black, Indians defined as brown, and we're all supposed to operate in a particular way. And we're all supposed to try, like the Italians and the Irish did, to accede to whiteness. So we have to deconstruct this whole thing. And I think 1970, in the way that they proclaimed Black Power, including all non-white people. And I can tell you, growing up in that movement, I knew of Indian revolutionaries, European revolutionaries, and African revolutionaries. Of course, African revolutionaries were by far and above the leaders of the movement, the most profound leaders of the movement. But you had a plethora of people involved in the revolution. I think we need to make all those things clear when we talk.
I debate for another day, Shabaka. We could debate that for hours. But I
want to leave you guys. I want to leave you guys. Yeah, we give
Rhoda. Let's give Rhoda and the other guests a chance to make final remarks. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't have any much remarks to say except for this was an awesome conversation, which is never finished. So we will continue another time. But I want to leave another book. Mervyn Allain, Trinidadian author, one of my most admired people in the region. The Construction of Race and Ethnicity in the Caribbean. I urge every Caribbean person to read a book. You must read a book. The Construction of Race and Ethnic Identity in the Caribbean by Mervyn Allain.
Yeah, as we end, I will say that I do agree with you 100% that we must address the question of religious supremacy that we inherited from the colonial period. That is certainly something that was clear in the Black Power Revolution, and it as clear as it is today. I want to thank all our guests tonight.
No, I want to hear some final remarks from Leydis in particular, and perhaps David as well. Leydis, what next for Cuba? What can you leave the audience with? What next for Cuba?
Yeah, what message would you all like to? Yes. What message would you and the ambassador and your colleagues in Trinidad want to send to the people of Trinidad and Tobago tonight before you leave the show?
We want the first time thank you to all social organizations to support our country and to bring all their solidarity with our country. And also we request and we want that this solidarity continue continue supporting our country, especially in this humanitarian situation. But we want to convey our gratitude to all organizations, the social organization here in Trinidad and Tobago that organize every meeting, every space, organize and create a public space to denounce the blockade, to denounce the coercive sanctions against our country, especially David Abdulah, that anytime make a statement in support to our people. And thank you very much for all this solidarity with our country. And I am sure that the ambassador want to say this message also.
Thank you, ladies.
So
Thank you very
David,
much.
David, last
Yes.
word is yours. What's the next
Okay.
solidarity
Yeah.
event, and are you hopeful of CARICOM taking any action?
Okay.
And we can close with that.
Yeah. I'm not hopeful that CARICOM is going to take strong action. I think that there's division. I listened to Holness last night, and Holness, part of what he said is that, yes, there's a humanitarian crisis in Cuba, but he didn't say that the cause of the humanitarian crisis was the United States blockade. And then he pivoted and said, you know, Cuba has to reform, and Jamaica believes in a market economy. Now, it's not for us to tell Cuba what kind of economy they should have. That is for the Cuban people to decide, right? And the Cuban economy has changed over the years. So there is an element of private ownership and all of that kind of thing, you know. So I'm not hopeful that CARICOM will come out with a strong position on Cuba. They will reaffirm the call for the end of the blockade and things like that. But I'm not confident of anything much stronger, and that's going to be a sad thing. Hopefully, some individual leaders will then make stronger statements. But yes, on Sunday, the 1st of March, from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m., we have an activity, a public forum at the OV2 Port of Spain building on Upper Henry Street, just above Oxford Street. It really is, we organized this before all of these statements by Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar, but it's in recognition of the centennial of Fidel's birth. Fidel would have been 100 in August of this year. So it's part of the recognition of the centennial of his birth. And also yesterday was the anniversary of the launch of the 1895 War of Independence in Cuba by Jose Marti and by General Maximo Gomez, who was a Afro-Cuban, never forget that, right? I was the principal general of that War of Independence, because Jose Marti actually was killed not too long after the start of the 1895 war. So, and Afro-Cubans were very central to that War of Independence, even more so per capita than the Euro-Cuban, European Cubans. So that's going to be on Sunday afternoon. We'll have a short film on Fidel, an address by the ambassador. We have two internationally renowned persons speaking as guest speakers. Professor Molimo Horace Campbell, Jamaican, who lectures up in the United States, Pan-Africanist, and also Dr. James Early, who is very active in the Artists and Intellectuals for Humanity, an American, but just was in Cuba about 2 weeks ago. So that's going to be a very important conversation. And then Abiel Jackson should be doing a short cultural presentation for us as well. And there'll be space for people to ask questions and engage in discussions. So that's on, and we really want people to come out. You know, everybody who vexed with what the PM said and who's supporting Cuba, you know, don't just like something on Facebook or post something on Facebook or send out something on Instagram. Come out and so on. And this is being co-hosted by a whole number of organizations, including yours, Shabaka, and Dr. Claudia's Caribbean Freedom Project, Emancipation Support Committee, Joint Trade Union Movement, Network of NGOs for the Advancement of Women, Warahu Community of San Fernando, New National Vision, Black Agenda Project, MSJ, and I may have missed All Mansions of Rastafari, and Black Agenda Project. So there are at least 10 organizations that are co-hosting this, and we really want those individual organizations to encourage their members to come out. Let's fill up that hall and send that vibration back to Havana and Santiago and everywhere in between, that Trinidad and Tobago, the people are standing in solidarity with Cuba, and that Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar does not speak for us at all.
Can I
anyone in the audience we should acknowledge? I can't touch my device.
No, I don't want to acknowledge, but I want the sister to know that here at Howard University on Friday, the Caribbean Students Association are also holding an event, and we are questioning the notion of Blackness in the Caribbean, but also we're paying tribute to Cuba, and we have with us a graduate student who just got back from Cuba last week, and we are going to be talking about it. So we are in solidarity. We are pushing the students here at Howard University to do their part as well in support of Cuba, Haiti, and Venezuela.
Thank
Yes,
you very
indeed.
much.
And of course, let's close tonight with the way that Cubans close their meetings. Hasta Victoria siempre.
Hasta la victoria, siempre.
Siempre. And the response is venceremos.
Okay.
Venceremos.
All right, sister.
Okay.
Our solidarity is with Cuba. One love. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks again. Bye. How do I get out?